Kestrel Draven always said Mars smelled like burnt toast, which was a polite way of saying it was the kind of place where optimism went to die. Not that anyone was sniffing, considering the perpetual haze of red dust and regulations thicker than a politician's skull. Kes perched on a weather-beaten rock, squinting at a readout on her datapad that was spitting out more nonsense than a tabloid. "Ain't that something?" she murmured, tapping the screen like it owed her money. Beside her, the grizzled form of Marcus Grunt Grimaldi scowled at the horizon, which was as barren as his social life. "What's the matter, Kes? Another message from your secret admirer." Grunt's voice was rough, like gravel in a blender. He had a face to match. "Nah, just another warning from the universe that we're all doomed." Kes tossed the datapad into Grunt's lap. It was the Mars equivalent of a high five. Grunt scanned the data, his bushy eyebrows doing a dance of displeasure. "ChronoScourge again, huh? I was hoping they'd just send us a fruit basket this time." "Yeah, well, time-traveling aliens aren't exactly known for their gift-giving etiquette," Kes replied, crossing her arms. "Looks like they're messing with the timeline again. Something about turning our colonies into their personal ant farm. And here I thought being quarantined on Mars was the worst thing that could happen this week," Grunt said, scratching his chin. "Guess we should have known better than to trust a species that can't even decide what decade to invade us from." The rest of the team huddled around, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of the dying Martian sun. At the helm of this ragtag bunch of misfits was Theo Theorizin Thackeray, a man with a penchant for conspiracy theories and eyebrows that looked like they were plotting to take over his face. "All right, people," Theo announced, clapping his hands together like a motivational speaker at a funeral. "We've got ChronoScourge activity in sectors B and C. If they mess with time anymore, we'll be stuck in a paradox loop so tight it'll make a pretzel blush. So what's the plan, boss?" piped up Jax, the team's youngest member and resident tech wizard, whose optimism was only slightly less annoying than his taste in music. "Plan? Oh, you sweet summer child," Theo chuckled. "Our plan is to do what humans do best, wing it, but with style." Kes groaned. "Why do I feel like wing it usually ends with us blowing something up?" "Because it does," Grunt nodded, producing a small explosive from his pocket like he was pulling a rabbit out of a hat. "But hey, if we're going down, might as well make it flashy. Nothing says human ingenuity like detonating your way out of a time travel crisis," Kes sighed. "All right, Theo. What's the angle with these paradoxes?" Theo grinned, his teeth gleaming in the Martian twilight. "We create a paradox so irritating that even the ChronoScourge can't ignore it. Think of it as giving them a headache that spans centuries." Jack snorted. "So we're basically trolling them across time. I like it." "Exactly," Theo said, eyes twinkling with the kind of excitement you only see in gamblers and madmen. "We throw a wrench into their plans so big. It makes a black hole look like a kiddie pool." "Sounds risky," Grunt muttered, leaning on his rifle like it was an old drinking buddy. "But hell, it's not like we have many other options." "Risky? Sure," Kes said, her eyes narrowing. "Suicidal, probably. But at least we'll go down as the most annoying pests in history." Theo nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. We become history's headache. Let's get to work, team." The group dispersed, each member heading off to prepare for humanity's latest bout of cosmic mischief-making. Kes watched them go, her mind a whirlwind of plans and what-ifs. It was a crazy idea, but then again, crazy was the norm when you lived in a universe where the only constant was chaos. In the makeshift command center, Kes and Theo pored over charts and timelines, their discussions punctuated by the hum of malfunctioning equipment. "You ever think we should have chosen a career with less temporal instability?" Kes asked, her gaze fixed on a holographic map that flickered like it was having an existential crisis. "What, and miss out on all the fun?" Theo replied, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "Besides, I hear those desk jobs are murder on your posture." "True," Kes agreed, a smirk playing at her lips. "Plus, you don't get to play intergalactic hide-and-seek with aliens from the comfort of an office chair." "Exactly," Theo said, leaning back in his chair with a creak. "Now, let's find us a paradox so obnoxious the ChronoScourge have no choice but to pack up their bags and bugger off." "Right," Kes said, rolling her shoulders. "Let's show them what humanity's all about, stubbornness and a reckless disregard for universal safety." Hours ticked by as the team worked, their ingenuity fueled by caffeine and the kind of desperation that makes great warriors and terrible poets. Jax was neck-deep in code, fingers flying over his keyboard like a pianist at a speed metal concert. Grunt stood watch, rifle ever ready, while Theo and Kes crafted their paradox, a temporal middle finger aimed squarely at the alien invaders. "You know," Jax said, not looking up from his screen, "I always thought saving the universe would involve more capes and less probability theory." "Never underestimate the power of a well-placed paradox," Theo said. Grinning, "We may not have capes, but we've got the element of surprise." "In explosives," Grunt added, ever the realist. "Right," Kes said, tightening the straps on her gear. "Let's go make history, or at least confuse the hell out of it." With the plan set, the team moved through the Martian colony, a place as warm and welcoming as a tax audit. They reached the heart of the ChronoScourge's interference, a twisted mass of alien tech that pulsed with a sickly glow. All right, folks, Theo said, raising his voice over the whine of machinery. This is it. Once we activate the paradox, there's no going back. Well, I left my time machine in my other pants, so that's fine by me, Jax quipped, securing the last of his devices. Let's give these bastards something to remember, Kes said, setting her jaw with determination. Or forget, as the case may be. The team moved quickly, each member executing their part of the plan with precision born of necessity. As Kes initiated the paradox sequence, the air crackled with an energy that was distinctly unwelcoming. Here goes nothing, she murmured, hitting the final key with more hope than conviction. The machine hummed ominously, and for a moment time seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a blinding flash, the paradox was unleashed, a cacophony of twisted logic and temporal chaos that sent shockwaves through the alien machinery. The ChronoScourge tech shuddered, its glow flickering like a dying bulb, and somewhere in the depths of time, a migraine bloomed. Did it work? Jax asked, shielding his eyes from the residual light. We'll know if we're still here in a minute, Theo replied, his voice a blend of excitement and terror. As the dust settled, the alien interference began to wane, the oppressive weight lifting from the colony like a bad hangover finally passing. Looks like we did it, Kes said, a note of disbelief in her voice. Those time-twisting bastards are finally backing off. Or regrouping for round 2, Grunt cautioned, ever the pessimist with a penchant for realism. Either way, Theo said, clapping a hand on Kes' shoulder, we've given them something to think about. And probably a reason to hate humanity even more, Kes added with a wry smile. As the team gathered their gear and prepared to retreat, the air still buzzing with the remnants of their temporal trickery, Kes couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they'd managed to turn the tables, if only for a moment. They'd shown the ChronoScourge what it meant to be human, resilient, unpredictable, and infuriatingly stubborn. And as they made their way back to the colony, the horizon bathed in the weak glow of the Martian dawn, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The ChronoScourge would be back, of that there was no doubt. But so would they. Ready to face whatever paradoxical madness the universe threw their way next. The Martian dawn was a sight only a mother could love, assuming that mother had a penchant for red dust and despair. Kes squinted at the pinkish horizon as she and the gang trudged back to the command center, her boots sinking into the gritty soil with each step. Behind her, Grunt shuffled along, looking like someone whose idea of fun involved dental surgery without anesthetic. Feeling optimistic, Grunt, Kes asked, casting a sideways glance at his perpetually grim visage. About as optimistic as a turkey on Thanksgiving, he grunted, which was a fitting response coming from a man nicknamed after a sound rather than a personality trait. Well, I choose to think of it as a sign we're not dead yet, she said with a shrug. That or the universe is just toying with us before it drops the hammer. Universe loves its dramatic irony, Grunt replied, spitting on the ground with the nonchalance of a cowboy in an old western. Inside the command center, the rest of the team was already gathered, their faces lit by the glow of malfunctioning screens. Theo was in deep conversation with Ozymandias Oz Flux, their resident mad scientist. Oz was a man whose brilliance was matched only by his eccentricity. His hair stood on end as if permanently surprised by its owner's intelligence, and his lab coat looked like it had seen better decades. Ah, the prodigal children return, Theo announced, gesturing grandly with both arms as Kes and Grunt entered. Just in time for our latest harebrained scheme. Can't wait, Kes said, eyeing Oz's contraption, which looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and broken dreams. What fresh hell have you cooked up this time, Oz? Oz grinned, the kind of smile that suggested he might have been dropped on his head as a child. We're going to give the ChronoScourge a taste of their own medicine. A paradox so convoluted, it'll make their brains dribble out their ears. That's the spirit, Jack said, giving Oz a thumbs up from behind his own nest of cables and screens. When in doubt, confuse the hell out of them. So, what's the catch? Grunt asked, ever the pessimist, crossing his arms like a man who knew better than to trust an idea that sounded too good to be true. Oz's expression turned sheepish, which was never a good sign. Well, there's a teensy-weensy risk of creating a temporal loop. How teensy-weensy are we talking? Kes asked, narrowing her eyes. Like we might relive the same day over and over for eternity teensy, Oz admitted, adjusting his glasses. But hey, on the bright side, we'd have plenty of time to perfect our coffee brewing skills. Great, Kes said, rolling her eyes. We'll be the most caffeinated people in history, assuming we don't die of boredom first. Theo clapped his hands, rubbing them together with an eagerness that bordered on the psychotic. All right, troops, let's roll the dice. Worst case, we get stuck in a time loop and have to spend eternity listening to Jax's terrible music. Hey, my playlist's a work of art, Jax protested, flicking a switch on his console. Now, let's show these time-traveling bastards what humanity's made of. With everyone in position, Oz activated the device, a jumble of wires and flickering lights that whined ominously as it powered up. Kes watched with a mix of trepidation and resignation. If things went south, at least they could blame it on Oz's questionable engineering skills. Here we go, Oz announced, pressing a series of buttons in a sequence that seemed to defy logic. Unleash the paradox. The machine let out a high-pitched wail, like a banshee with a toothache, and the room exploded with light. For a moment, everything was chaos, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds that made the inside of Kess's skull feel like a blender on puree. And then, just like that, it was over. Kess blinked, squinting around the room. Everything looked the same, but there was something unnervingly familiar about it all. The command center, the hum of the equipment, even the way Grunt was leaning against the wall with his usual air of disinterest. It was all exactly the same as it had been. Hey, did it work? Jax asked, his voice breaking the silence. Depends on your definition of work, Theo replied, glancing at Oz, whose triumphant grin had faltered into something more akin to a grimace. Guys, Kess said slowly, pointing out the window at the horizon. Is it just me? Or does that look like the same sunrise we just walked in from? Jax checked his chrono on the datapad, his eyes going wide. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. We're right back where we started. Welcome to eternal deja vu, Grunt muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. Looks like we're stuck in a loop. Well, at least we know what we're doing today, Oz said, trying to sound upbeat and failing miserably. Same thing we do every day, try to save the world. More like try not to kill each other, Kess said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Guess we're going to find out just how long it takes before we all go mad. Theo paced, his mind working overtime. All right, no need to panic. There's gotta be a way to break out of this, right, Oz? Oz shrugged, his expression sheepish once more. Theoretically, sure. Practically, we're flying blind. So, we've managed to trap ourselves in a time loop with no idea how to get out, Kess summarized. Just another day in paradise. The team spent the next endless series of days, if they could even be called that, trying to untangle the mess they'd created. Each reset brought them back to the same point, the same sunrise, the same grim realization that they were no closer to a solution. Conversations became increasingly bizarre, as the team exhausted the topics they could discuss without repeating themselves. Grunt took to reciting old Earth poetry, his gravelly voice lending a certain gravitas to the words, while Jax tried to teach himself to juggle with spare parts, much to Theo's dismay. How's the escape plan coming along, Oz? Kess asked one day, her voice tinged with the sharp edge of impatience. Well, I'm confident we're narrowing it down, Oz replied, tapping furiously at his console. Give me a couple more loops and I might just crack it. That's what you said 5 loops ago, Grunt pointed out, not unkindly. I'm starting to think we're gonna die of old age before we figure this out. Don't worry, Theo said with a grin that was only partially forced. I've got a plan. We'll annoy the ChronoScourge so much they'll have no choice but to break the loop for us. Oh, great, Jax said, tossing a wrench in the air and catching it. Operation, be a bunch of nuisances, my favorite. Kess sighed. Well, it beats doing nothing. Let's see how much chaos we can cause. And so began their campaign of mischief. Each loop they'd alter something small, a misplaced tool, a slight adjustment to the alien tech, a strategically placed explosive courtesy of Grunt. The hope was that one change might ripple out, causing enough disruption to crack the loop open like an egg. Days blurred into one another, an endless cycle of trial and error, frustration mixing with gallows humor as they worked tirelessly to outsmart the very trap they'd set. Look on the bright side, Theo said one morning, as they prepared for another round of temporal sabotage. At least we're not dead. Yet, Grunt added, ever the realist. Hey, pessimism never solved anything, Jax replied, his voice holding a glimmer of misplaced optimism. We just need to keep trying. Kess nodded, though her enthusiasm was waning. Let's see if we can't give those time-twisting bastards a reason to regret ever messing with us. And so they did, each attempt more audacious than the last. One day they rigged the alien machinery to play a loop of Earth's most irritating pop songs, the kind that burrowed into your brain and refused to leave. Another day, they filled the command center with rubber ducks, which had the dual effect of lifting their spirits and infuriating the ChronoScourge's sense of order. Think they'll finally take the bait? Kess asked, watching as Jax gleefully scattered the ducks across the room. If they don't, they're not as smart as they think they are, Theo replied, his grin wicked. Let's make this a loop to remember. With each passing loop, their pranks grew more elaborate, their antics a blend of creativity and desperation. And slowly, imperceptibly, things began to change. Subtle shifts in the environment, tiny glitches in the reset, hints that their efforts were having an impact. The ChronoScourge's machines began to malfunction, their precision slipping as humanity's chaotic influence took hold. Maybe we're finally getting somewhere. Oz mused one day, watching as a piece of alien tech sparked and fizzled. Or maybe we're just driving them insane, Grunt replied, a rare twinkle in his eye. Either way, I'm calling it a win. Keep at it, team, Theo encouraged, a new light in his eyes. If this doesn't work, at least we'll have given them a headache that'll last millennia. And so, with renewed determination, they pressed on, each loop bringing them closer to breaking free. They would succeed not through brute force or superior technology, but through sheer human stubbornness and the ability to laugh in the face of the impossible. Because in the end, humanity was nothing if not annoyingly persistent. and if the ChronoScourge wanted to play games with time. They'd picked the wrong species to mess with. The command center had become a second skin, a very itchy, constricting skin that seemed determined to drive them all insane. Kess balanced a rubber duck on the edge of her console, watching it wobble with each tiny vibration in the floor. So are we going for a world record in the most pointless existence, or what? Theo, ever the optimist or masochist depending on your perspective, paced like a caged tiger, eyes flicking over the malfunctioning screens. Don't worry, we'll crack this egg eventually. Besides, who doesn't love a little repetition? Oz, how much longer until you find us the magic bean that'll get us out of this temporal purgatory? Grunt's voice was the audible equivalent of gravel being ground underfoot, and somehow it was comforting in its consistency. Working on it, Oz said, his fingers flying over the keyboard with a determination that bordered on fanatical. You can't rush genius. Or insanity, Jax muttered from his corner, where he was attempting to stack a tower of circuit boards. At this rate, I'll be the king of alien Jenga. As if on cue, the tower collapsed in a clatter of plastic and metal. Jax surveyed the mess with a sigh, or maybe just the court jester. It was then that Neckley, their paradox theorist and resident voice of reason, or something close to it, entered the room, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. She had the look of someone who had just discovered their toast was both buttered and burnt. I've got an idea that might just get us out of this loop. Do tell, Kess said, her voice laced with sarcasm but underpinned by genuine curiosity. Neckley took a deep breath, the kind that suggested she was about to propose something wildly irresponsible. What if we alter our actions in a precise sequence? Kind of domino effect that disrupts the loop's consistency. Theo stopped pacing. A butterfly effect, but with fewer butterflies and more chaos. Exactly, Neckley replied, nodding. A series of specific changes that create a cascade, breaking the loop's hold. Sounds simple enough, Grunt said dryly. Except for the part where we have to figure out what changes to make. Neckley shrugged, her smile wry. It's a shot in the dark. But it's better than banging our heads against recycled air. All right, let's give it a whirl, Theo said, clapping his hands together. We've got nothing to lose but our minds, and I think we're halfway there already. With Neckley at the helm, they set to work, devising a plan that was half science, half madness, and all desperation. Each loop they'd make tiny adjustments. Jax would switch out a component, Kess would alter the energy output, Theo would shuffle the command center's layout like a demented interior decorator, all in the hopes of creating the perfect storm of anomalies. Oz, any thoughts on this plan of ours? Kess asked, as they prepared to reset once again. Oz looked up from his console, his eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm that had no place in their current predicament. It's either completely genius or catastrophically stupid. I'm in. Perfect, Grunt said, with a nod that might have been approval or resignation. Let's get this over with. The first few loops were almost identical to the ones that came before. Each reset met with the same frustrating familiarity. But gradually, imperceptibly, things began to shift. A flicker of static on the monitors where there had been none before. A delay in the reset so brief it was almost imagined. Tell me I'm not going crazy, Jax said one day as they regrouped in the command center. But I swear something's different. Not just you, Kess agreed, tapping her datapad. I'm seeing the same anomalies. Neckley, you might be onto something. Thank God, Theo said, his relief palpable. I was starting to think we'd end up as some kind of cosmic joke. Still might, Grunt pointed out, ever the realist. But at least we're a cosmic joke with a plan. With each loop, they refined their strategy, adjusting variables with the precision of surgeons wielding a scalpel made of chaos theory. Neckley became the linchpin, her understanding of paradoxes guiding them like a lighthouse in a storm. Any regrets, Neckley? Theo asked during a rare moment of downtime as they waited for the next reset. Only that I didn't pack more coffee, Neckley replied, her grin infectious even in their dire situation. But hey, caffeine withdrawal is character building, right? Tell that to my headaches, Jax chimed in, rubbing his temples. I swear if I survive this. I'm building a shrine to coffee beans. Add me to the worshiper list, Kess said. If nothing else, it beats praying to malfunctioning alien tech. Their efforts finally came to a head one loop when the command center's screens flared to life, displaying a flurry of colors and patterns that defied logic. It was a sight to behold, beautiful in its chaos. Looks like we've hit a nerve, Oz said, his excitement barely contained. The ChronoScourge won't know what hit him. Good, Theo said, his eyes narrowed in determination. Let's give them hell. The team worked in tandem, a well-oiled machine born of endless repetition and sheer stubbornness. Each action choreographed to disrupt the loop, to send a ripple through the timeline that would either free them or seal their fate. Here goes nothing, Neckley murmured, as she keyed in the final sequence of commands. The room filled with a low hum, a vibration that set their teeth on edge. The lights flickered, the air crackling with potential, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then with a sound like reality itself tearing at the seams, the loop shattered. The command center was bathed in white light, blinding and all-consuming. Kess shielded her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable impact. But instead of the familiar reset, there was silence. a stillness so profound it felt like the eye of a storm. Did it work? Jax's voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. I think so, Theo replied, all coloring his words. I think we did it. As the light faded, revealing the command center in its usual state of organized chaos, Kes let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Well, I'll be damned. Nekali's smile was the first thing Kes saw when she opened her eyes. It was a smile of triumph, tempered by the knowledge that they had pulled off the impossible. Looks like we're back in business. Oz marked this day, Theo said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. The day we outsmarted a time loop. Already noted, Oz replied, his fingers dancing over the console. I plan to gloat about this for the rest of my life. Short though it might be, Grunt added, his words blunt but tinged with the warmth of camaraderie. But hey, at least we went out with a bang. Speaking of which, Kes said, glancing around at the newly reset room, anyone else feel like a celebratory drink? Make mine a double, Jax said, flopping into a chair with a sigh. I think we've earned it. As the team settled into their newfound reality, weariness giving way to a cautious optimism, Kes allowed herself a moment to savor the victory. It was a small win, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but it was theirs, hard-won and deserved. Nekali joined her at the console, her expression thoughtful. What's next, do you think? Who knows, Kes said, shrugging with a smile. But whatever it is, we'll face it the same way we did this, together. And with a hell of a lot of snark. Count me in, Nekali said, offering a fist bump that Kes returned with enthusiasm. As the team regrouped, buoyed by their success and the promise of whatever lay ahead, Kes couldn't help but feel hopeful. They might be a ragtag bunch thrown together by circumstance, but they had faced the impossible and come out the other side stronger for it. Maybe, just maybe, there was something to be said for human tenacity after all. The team sat in the command center, surrounded by the familiar chaos that had somehow become comforting. The ChronoScourge might be a nightmare, but they had their own brand of insanity to wield. Kestrel Draven, or Kes as her friends called her, shifted her datapad to a more comfortable position, eyeing the screens with their constant buzz of data like they might bite. They'd escaped the loop, but the reality outside of it wasn't exactly a sunny picnic on the Martian vista. Anyone else feel like we're just a cosmic ant farm? Kes asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she nudged the rubber duck on her console, its presence oddly reassuring in the sea of electronics. Speak for yourself, Grunt replied, his gravelly voice as soothing as ever, like a sandblaster to the soul. I feel more like a hamster on a wheel and the wheel's on fire. Theo, the ever-optimistic, or perhaps just clinically insane, leader of their motley crew, stopped his habitual pacing to nod. We're out of the frying pan and into the sun, but at least we're not sizzling alone. Small comforts, Jax muttered, shifting in his seat as he tried to rearrange his latest stack of circuit boards, a monument to his own stubbornness. Nekali, their paradox theorist and the supposed genius behind their latest gambit, was staring at a screen, her brow furrowed like she'd just seen a particularly ugly bug. We're out, but there's a problem, she announced, drawing everyone's attention. The ChronoScourge have accelerated their timeline. We're looking at a speed run to the end of humanity here. Great, Kes said, rolling her eyes. So we're basically in a race we didn't sign up for, against opponents who have a head start, and we're riding tricycles with square wheels. Oz, the resident mad scientist, was practically vibrating with a mix of anxiety and excitement. This is fantastic, he exclaimed, earning a few incredulous looks. A challenge worthy of our combined insanity. Yeah, if by fantastic you mean completely buggered, Grunt growled, crossing his arms like a wall of disgruntlement. So what do? Theo asked, trying to keep the mood buoyant despite the ship sinking around them. Any more brilliant ideas, Nekali? Nekali shrugged, a small, resigned smile on her lips. We need a deeper understanding of paradoxes. We're playing with forces that make a supernova look like a sparkler. Theo nodded, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Okay, so we need to go back to school. Anyone got a time machine for that? We've got Oz, Kes said, gesturing to the mad scientist who was now juggling equations on his datapad like a caffeinated octopus. If anyone can find a shortcut, it's him. Oz beamed, clearly enjoying the spotlight. I'll get right on it. Who needs a social life when you've got cosmic mysteries to unravel? Social life, Jack snorted. What's that? Some fancy new tech I've missed out on. Focus, people, Grunt said, his voice cutting through the banter like a chainsaw through butter. We've got a universe to save, and it's not going to wait for us to get our acts together. Nekali stood. Determination etched across her face. We need to find a way to slow the ChronoScourge down, buy us some breathing room. How do you slow down time-traveling aliens? Kes asked, tapping her rubber duck for inspiration. Offer them a free vacation on Mars. Maybe we distract them with Jax's circuit board sculptures, Theo suggested, earning a mock-offended glare from Jax. Hey, those are works of art, Jax protested. Just because they're not practical doesn't mean they lack value. Like poetry, Kes said dryly. Nice to look at, but not much use in a firefight. Oz clapped his hands, his eyes wide with epiphany. I've got it, a temporal dampening field. We could create a bubble in space-time to slow their advance. Sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi holoflick, Grunt grunted. But if it buys us a few minutes, I'm all for it. Theo nodded, a plan forming in his mind. All right, let's split up. Oz, you work on that dampening field. Jack, see if you can jury-rig anything useful from those circuit boards. Kess Neckley, keep digging into those paradoxes. We need every advantage we can get. On it, Kess said, pulling up data files with a determination that even the ChronoScourge would envy. Time to put our collective genius to the test, Neckley added, her fingers flying over her console. Jax gave a mock salute. I'll see what I can cook up, hopefully something that doesn't explode. As the team got to work, the atmosphere in the command center was one of grim determination mixed with the ever-present gallows humor that kept them sane. Each of them knew the stakes, understood just how close they were skating to the edge of oblivion. Hours blurred together, the only constants the hum of electronics and the occasional quip breaking the tension. Oz was in his element, surrounded by schematics and equations, his mind a whirlwind of potential solutions. Hey Oz, Kess called over, her tone light but carrying an edge of urgency. How's that field coming? Are we about to invent a new type of radiation? Oz looked up, a wild gleam in his eyes. Radiation is just another form of problem solving. But yes, I think I've got something, just need a few more tweaks. Grunt, ever the pragmatist, leaned back in his seat. Let's hope those tweaks don't blow us to kingdom come. Where's your sense of adventure? Theo asked, pacing as always but with a noticeable spring in his step. Left it back on Earth, Grunt replied. Along with my patience. Okay, everyone, Neckley announced, interrupting the banter. I've got something. It might not be a silver bullet, but it's a start. Do tell, Jack said, looking up from his latest construction, a delicate tower that defied the laws of physics just by existing. Neckley unfolded a holochart, the lines and nodes forming a complex web of possibilities. If we can disrupt their temporal anchors, we might be able to slow their timeline manipulation. Fancy words, Kess said, arching an eyebrow, but I'm assuming it translates to screw with their tech and hope for the best. Pretty much, Neckley confirmed, her grin matching Kess's sarcasm. All right then, Theo said, rallying the troops. Let's get to it. We've pulled off the impossible once. Let's see if we can go 2 for 2. With renewed vigor, the team set about implementing the plan. Oz's fingers danced over the controls as he calibrated the dampening field, while Kess and Neckley worked in tandem to identify potential targets for their sabotage. Jax, for his part, continued his tinkering, each new creation an intricate puzzle that only he could solve. His humor, as self-deprecating as always, served as a balm to the ever-present stress. Ever get the feeling we're the punchline to some cosmic joke? He asked, securing a circuit board into place. Only every day, Kess replied, not looking up from her work, but at least we're in on the joke. As the hours dragged on, the strain began to show, but so did the progress. The team was a machine, each part crucial to the whole. Even Grunt's grumbling served a purpose, grounding them in a reality that was otherwise slipping through their fingers. Then at last, Oz stood back from his console, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Field's ready. Let's hope this doesn't backfire spectacularly. Let's hope it does something, Grunt corrected, always the realist. All right, everyone, Theo said, taking charge. Brace yourselves. Time to see if we're geniuses or just really stubborn idiots. The moment of truth descended like a quiet storm. Each member of the crew found their place, fingers poised over controls, breaths held in anticipation. With a nod from Theo, Oz activated the field. Reality seemed to warp and bend, the air thick with tension as the dampening field engaged. It was a sensation like standing on the edge of a cliff, the abyss beckoning with the promise of either failure or flight. Here goes nothing, Kess muttered, her eyes fixed on the screens as data flowed like a torrent. Seconds ticked by, each heartbeat an eternity, and then slowly but surely the readings began to change. It's working, Neckley whispered, almost afraid to believe it. We're actually slowing them down. Not bad for days' work, Jack said with a crooked grin, his tower finally standing tall and proud. Oz let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I'll be damned, we did it. The team erupted into celebration, a hodgepodge of relieved laughter and exhausted cheers. It was a victory, perhaps a small one, but a victory nonetheless. They'd bought themselves time, precious and fleeting, but time all the same. All right, people, Theo said, his tone lighter now. Let's not waste it. We've got a universe to save, and I plan on doing it with style. As the team settled back into their roles, determined and rejuvenated, Kess allowed herself a moment to savor the triumph. The ChronoScourge might have the upper hand, but they weren't invincible. Not while she and her friends had anything to say about it. With renewed energy, they dove back into the fray, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited. They were survivors, misfits with a mission, and if the universe wanted to throw down the gauntlet, they'd pick it up with a smile and a middle finger. Well, this is a colossal cock-up, Kess said, staring at the mess of wires, screens, and blinking lights that was supposed to be a state-of-the-art command center, but now looked like a scrapyard's fever dream. Oz, as ever, was fiddling with something that looked like it might explode any second. I don't suppose you've got a magic wand in there, Oz. Oz didn't look up, too engrossed in the innards of what he claimed was a temporal dampening field. Though it bore a striking resemblance to a toaster with delusions of grandeur, if I did, I'd conjure us some common sense first. Kess snorted, the sound lost amid the chaos. Common sense. That's a myth like unicorns or the ChronoScourge taking a day off. Grunt, who was lurking in the shadows like a disgruntled gargoyle, let out a noise that could have been a chuckle or a cough. You two done bickering, or do I need to grab popcorn for the show? Just getting warmed up, Kess shot back, tapping her rubber duck against the console in what was quickly becoming her stress ritual. If Oz here doesn't pull a rabbit out of his hat soon, we're all gonna end up like that duck, quacking mad and doomed to float aimlessly, Grunt suggested. Oz finally glanced up, his eyes wide with the kind of manic energy that would have sent most people running for the hills. I prefer the term creatively optimistic. Yeah, well, creative optimism isn't going to stop the ChronoScourge from turning us into their personal playthings, Kess replied, her fingers dancing over her datapad as she tried to make sense of the data flow. We need something big, something that'll make them think twice before messing with us again. Theo, ever the optimist or lunatic, bounded into the room with the kind of energy that suggested he'd been drinking straight adrenaline. I've got it, he exclaimed, waving a tattered piece of paper like it was the Holy Grail, a map to a Martian artifact. Word is, it could be the key to creating a grand paradox. Jax, who was attempting to build a sculpture out of broken circuit boards, paused to squint at Theo. Are you sure your map isn't just a treasure hunt from last year's office party? Theo brandished the paper. I prefer the term ancient Martian artifact with time-bending properties, thank you very much. Kess glanced at the map, skepticism practically radiating off her. And you're sure this isn't just some ancient prank, like a cosmic whoopee cushion? Theo grinned, the kind of grin that made people wonder whether he was about to sell them a bridge. Only one way to find out. Grunt rolled his eyes so hard they almost got stuck. We're really putting our fate in the hands of a Martian relic and a conspiracy nut's wild dreams. Hey, I've done crazier things and lived to tell the tale, Theo said with a shrug. That's not exactly comforting, Kess noted, but she pushed away from her console nonetheless. All right, let's go play Indiana Jones. Just promise me no snakes. Snakes, Grunt raised an eyebrow. We're on Mars, not some ancient jungle temple. Yeah, well, with our luck they'll have evolved laser eyes or something, she shot back. The crew gathered their gear. A hodgepodge of mismatched equipment that looked more like the aftermath of a garage sale than the armament of humanity's last hope. But they donned it with the kind of grim determination that said they'd face whatever the universe hurled at them, and they'd do it with style, misguided, dysfunctional style, but style nonetheless. As they ventured out into the Martian landscape, Kess couldn't help but admire the planet's relentless ugliness. The red dust seemed to get everywhere, turning them all into walking Mars bars. You know, she said, voice muffled through her rebreather, I think Mars could be quite charming if it wasn't so hell-bent on killing us every second. Charming, Grunt echoed, his voice a growl, like a cactus in the desert. Nice to look at, but God help you if you hug it. They trundled across the uneven terrain, following Theo's map with all the precision of a drunkard following a tightrope. The map led them to a craggy outcrop, the kind of place that screamed ominous artifact hidden here. So, what's the plan? Jax asked, tapping his foot impatiently. We just dig and hope we don't uncover some ancient Martian curse. Pretty much, Kess replied, hefting a spade that had seen better days. Let's dig for buried treasure and hope it's not a ticket to our doom. Hours passed as they worked, the grunts and groans of labor only broken by the occasional curse when someone hit their thumb instead of the ground. It was good, honest work, the kind that left your muscles aching and your soul questioning your life choices. Finally, their shovels struck something harder than rock. They unearthed an object half buried in the red soil, an artifact that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought geometry was for suckers. Well, that doesn't scream horrifying doom, Jax said, squinting at the bizarre contraption. More like avant-garde paperweight, Kess added, brushing the last of the dirt off. Theo, ever the enthusiast, leaned forward with the kind of reckless abandon that suggested he'd never seen an artifact he didn't want to poke. This is it, he breathed, eyes wide with a mix of awe and lunacy. And what does it do exactly? Grunt asked, his skepticism thicker than the Martian dust. Theo didn't answer immediately, too entranced by the thing's weird beauty. Or maybe he was just trying to figure out which end was up. If I'm right, and I usually am, don't ask me to prove it. This baby could help us create a paradox powerful enough to throw the ChronoScourge off their game. Or it could just blow us to kingdom come, Oz said, ever the voice of cautious optimism, or what passed for it in their line of work. But hey, at least we'd go out in style. Great, Kess said, rolling her eyes so hard they nearly took flight. Another spectacular opportunity to redefine the meaning of bad idea. Well, Theo said, clapping his hands together, it's not like we have any better options. We're on the brink, folks. Time to push the boundaries. Grunt, who'd been staring at the artifact like it owed him money, finally stepped back. All right, let's haul this potential disaster back and see if we can turn it into something useful. As they made their way back to their base, the artifact cradled in Kess's arms like a particularly ugly baby, she couldn't help but reflect on their situation. Here they were, humanity's last hope, betting everything on a relic that might be nothing more than an elaborate Martian joke. "Hey, Theo," she called over the comms, "if this thing doesn't work, remind me to haunt you from the afterlife." "If it doesn't work," Theo replied, "you'll have to get in line. I plan to haunt myself for getting us into this mess. Just make sure you keep the haunting to a minimum," Jax chimed in. "I've already got enough voices in my head." Back at the command center, they set the artifact down with all the reverence of a team handling a live grenade. Everyone gathered around, drawn to its strange allure despite, or maybe because of their creeping sense of doom. "So, what's next?" Grunt asked, arms folded across his chest like a bouncer at a particularly rowdy space bar. "Next," Theo said, "we figure out how to use this thing without unleashing an ancient curse or accidentally summoning a Martian god." "Good to know we're being cautious about this," Kess replied, sarcasm dripping from her words like oil from a leaky engine. Oz, ever the mad scientist in charge, began examining the artifact with the kind of attention usually reserved for particularly challenging crossword puzzles. "This is going to take some time," he admitted, fiddling with knobs and dials that seemed to have no logical purpose. "Time is the one thing we don't have," Neckley pointed out, her voice a calm counterpoint to the mounting chaos. "We need to understand this artifact before the ChronoScourge make their next move, which could be any time," Grunt added, "or yesterday, or last century for all we know." The hours stretched on as the team worked, tensions mounting like a pressure cooker teetering on the brink of explosion. Dark jokes kept the mood from descending into full-blown despair, each quip a lifeline in the turbulent sea of uncertainty. "Hey Oz," Jax called over, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "If you manage to blow us all up, can you make sure it's at least a pretty explosion? I want to go out with a bang. Only if you promise to leave me your circuit board collection in your will." Oz shot back, a rare grin splitting his face. "You two are impossible," Kess said, shaking her head, "but at least we'll die laughing." As the artifact slowly yielded its secrets, a plan began to form, a plan as audacious as it was risky. But audacity was their currency, risk their lifeblood. They had no choice but to wager their lives and the fate of humanity on a stone-carved relic from a civilization long since dust. Theo gathered the team once more, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty. "All right, folks, we've got our shot. It's a Hail Mary, but it's all we've got. Let's make sure the ChronoScourge remember the day they tangled with us. Here's to doing the impossible," Kess said, raising an imaginary glass, "and living to tell the tale. And if not," Grunt rumbled, "at least we'll haunt the bastards." With that, they set to work, the command center buzzing with a frenzied energy that felt almost alive. Each member of the crew was a cog in a machine of madness, but together they formed a force to be reckoned with, daring, defiant, and just a little bit crazy, exactly what they needed to be in a universe that had lost its mind. As the final pieces of their plan fell into place, they prepared to launch their desperate gamble. Win or lose, they would make their mark, and damn anyone who dared to stand in their way. Because that's what it meant to be human in a universe gone mad. To rise, like dust from a dying star, and fight against the fading of the light with every fiber of their being. The command center, a heap of wires, blinking lights, and screens cobbled together like a cybernetic Frankenstein, hummed with frenetic energy. Kess stared at the artifact resting on a table that definitely hadn't been built with Martian relics in mind. It looked like someone had taken a geometry textbook, shredded it, and then tried to sculpt it back together while blindfolded. "This thing's supposed to save us," she muttered, poking it with her datapad like it might suddenly sprout legs and do a little jig. "Looks more like something you'd find in a junkyard auction." "Right," Theo said, striding in with an enthusiasm that suggested he still believed in Santa Claus. "This baby is going to turn the tables on the ChronoScourge, or explode in our faces," Grunt grumbled, lurking in the shadows with all the charm of a sleep-deprived bear. Oz was elbow-deep in the artifact's guts, tweaking knobs and pressing buttons with the tender care of a surgeon. "Or perhaps a gambling addict on a losing streak. From what I can tell," he said, not looking up, "this thing can create a temporal paradox strong enough to make the ChronoScourge's head spin." "Great, so it's a glorified blender for timelines," Kess said, crossing her arms. "How do we stop it from blending us?" Neckley, ever the voice of rational doom, leaned against the console, looking like she hadn't slept since the last Martian ice age. "We need to synchronize its activation with a precise temporal alignment." "We need a what now?" Grunt asked, scratching his head. "Speak English or Martian or whatever we're supposed to be speaking out here." "It means," Jax interjected, soldering iron in hand like a futuristic Excalibur. "We need to press the right buttons at the right time, or we go kaboom." "Sounds easy," Theo said, flashing a grin that had seen more skepticism than trust. "Just like threading a needle in a hurricane." "So what's next?" Kess asked, glancing at the screens as they flickered with diagrams that looked as comprehensible as abstract art. "We just wait for the ChronoScourge to come knocking and hope we get the timing right." Pretty much, Theo replied, slapping the side of the console in what he probably thought was an encouraging gesture. Consider it our version of Russian roulette, but with more aliens and less vodka. As if on cue, alarms blared. Red lights bathed the command center in an eerie glow, like some nightclub for the chronically paranoid. The ChronoScourge were on their way. Looks like they got the invite, Grunt growled, reaching for his weapon. Time to show them what kind of party we're throwing. They're gonna show up with all the subtlety of a meteor strike, Jack said, already slipping on his gear. Guess we better get ready to throw our weight around. Outside, the Martian dawn was doing its best impersonation of a crime scene, red dust swirling in the wind like blood in water. The ChronoScourge ships descended, angular and menacing, like knives slicing through the sky. All right, team, Theo shouted over the din. This is it, we've got one shot at this. Let's make it count. Kes took her position, fingers dancing over the datapad. She was the brains, the one who'd keep track of their progress or lack thereof. Let's hope we don't screw this up, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Hope, Grunt said, strapping on his combat gear. Since when do we rely on that? Since now, Kes replied, trying to muster a confidence she didn't feel. The ships landed with a thunderous crash that rattled their teeth and shook their bones. The ChronoScourge poured out, all sleek armor and glowing eyes, like someone had combined a nightmare with a disco ball. Remember, folks, Theo called, they don't take prisoners, and neither do we. Who'd want prisoners? Oz said, looking up from his tinkering. Too much paperwork. Grunt led the charge, his voice a war cry, a promise of violence that echoed across the barren landscape. Let's give 'em hell, boys and girls. And so it began, the battle for humanity's future, for their own survival, for a chance to keep the universe spinning just a little bit longer. Weapons fired, lighting up the Martian haze with a staccato of death. Kes hunkered down, trying to focus on the datapad amid the chaos, calculations dancing like fireflies across the screen. How's it going, Kes? Jax called, ducking a bolt of energy that sizzled past his ear. Working on it, she replied through gritted teeth. Just keep them off my back, would you? Consider it done, Jax said, popping up to return fire with a grin that suggested he'd missed his calling as a professional daredevil. Nearby, Theo was in his element, shouting orders, rallying the troops, his voice a beacon of determination in the maelstrom. Remember, he bellowed, the fate of the universe rests on this. No pressure. Neckley was a blur, ducking, weaving, always in the right place at the right time, like she had her own personal relationship with destiny and wasn't afraid to call in favors. Grunt, meanwhile, was a one-man wrecking crew, his laughter a booming counterpoint to the carnage. Come on. You ugly bastards, he roared. I've been waiting for a fight. The ChronoScourge pressed on, relentless, a tide of destruction that threatened to overwhelm. But humanity was stubborn, and this ragtag band wasn't about to roll over without a fight. As the battle raged, the air filled with the scent of ozone and the tang of metal, Kes felt the rising tide of anxiety, a beast clawing at her insides. Almost there, she whispered, her fingers a blur as she worked. You better be, Grunt called over, blasting another alien back to whatever hell it had spawned from. We can't hold forever. No one lives forever, Grunt, Kes shot back, trying to steady her nerves. But I'll do my best. The artifact pulsed, glowing with a strange, otherworldly light, a heartbeat in the chaos. It was working, or at least she hoped it was. They had one shot, and she'd be damned if she let it slip through their fingers. Hold the line, Theo shouted, sweat streaking down his face as he fired another round. We've got this, easy for you to say, Jax grunted, ducking another blast. You're not the one they're aiming at. The battle dragged on, each second an eternity, each heartbeat a countdown. But they held, they fought, they survived by sheer will and a touch of madness. Finally, as the ChronoScourge seemed to falter, as if sensing the shift in the tide, Kes punched in the final sequence. The artifact flared, bright as a newborn star, and something changed, a shiver running through the air. Through time itself, it's working, she shouted, surprise mingling with triumph. It's actually working. The hell it is, Grunt said, disbelief warring with hope. What's happening? Temporal paradox, Oz explained, still fiddling as if he hadn't just witnessed the impossible. It's scrambling their timeline, messing with their heads. Theo's grin was feral, triumphant. Looks like we just became the universe's biggest headache. The ChronoScourge staggered, disoriented, their once perfect coordination shattered. They stumbled, faltered, and the tide began to turn. Nice trick, Jax said, admiration in his voice. Let's make sure they remember it. And with that, they pressed the advantage, driving the aliens back, taking the fight to them with a ferocity born of desperation and defiance. The ChronoScourge retreated, their ships lifting off in a chaotic scramble, leaving behind confusion, wreckage, and the lingering scent of their defeat. As the dust settled, as the last echoes of battle faded into the Martian dawn, the team stood victorious, battered but unbroken. They'd done it. Against the odds, against logic, against sanity, they'd pulled it off. Kes slumped, exhausted but elated, her heart pounding with the adrenaline of survival. We did it, she said, almost not believing the words herself. We actually did it. Was there ever any doubt? Theo asked, a grin splitting his face. Plenty. Grunt replied, wiping his brow. But who cares, we won. Yes, Jack said, looking around at their ragtag band, their makeshift fortress, and we looked damn good doing it. Oz chuckled, a rare sound that was more disturbing than reassuring. Let's just hope we don't have to do it again anytime soon. Neckily, ever the skeptic, nodded. One paradox at a time, I think. Here's to paradoxes, Kess said, raising an imaginary toast, and to surviving another day. They laughed, a sound that carried across the barren landscape, a brief, bright note in the grim, red expanse. They defied fate, thrown a wrench in the alien machine, and lived to tell the tale. As they regrouped, weary but triumphant, a new dawn broke over Mars, redder and dustier than ever, but somehow less menacing now. They'd earned a moment of peace, however fleeting, in a universe that seemed hell-bent on chaos. Well, team, Theo said, his voice warm and proud, we've got a hell of a story to tell. And plenty of scars to prove it, Grunt added, clapping a hand on Kess's shoulder. Yeah, she said, feeling the weight of the battle, the victory, the endless possibilities ahead. But let's make sure it's not our last. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but in that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of war and the promise of survival, they were a force to be reckoned with. A band of misfits, warriors, dreamers, and madmen, united by a common cause, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. For now, that would have to be enough. The ChronoScourge were retreating, but not with the grace of a well-planned withdrawal. No, it looked more like a band of circus clowns being chased by a rabid dog, if that dog happened to wield a paradox capable of unraveling spacetime. Quite the image, really. Kess stood in the command center, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead as she stared at the pulsing artifact. The thing had the audacity to look smug, glowing with an ethereal light that screamed, "Look what I did. If artifacts could snicker, this one would." Well, that's one way to turn the tables, she said, voice cracking from a mix of tension and relief. Her datapad chirped, probably with a message congratulating her on not blowing everyone to Kingdom Come. "Congratulations," Theo shouted, his voice half-drowned by the alarms that refused to shut up. "You've officially made us public enemy #1 in alien history." "Great," Kess replied, deadpan. "I'll be sure to wear that medal with pride." Grunt ambled over, looking like he'd been through a meat grinder and survived with nothing more than mild annoyance. "You think they'll put our faces on wanted posters? I'd hate to see the mugshots." "Considering how you look," Jax quipped, nursing a fresh bruise on his cheek, "I'm sure they'd need extra ink." Grunt grunted. An acknowledgement in his world. Who needs a face like mine when you've got a personality to match? "You do have a face for radio, Grunt," Kess said, earning a chuckle from the crew. Oz chose that moment to emerge from somewhere beneath a pile of wires, looking like he'd been enjoying himself far too much given the circumstances. The artifact worked splendidly. It's like watching a soap opera, but with higher stakes. "If you call existential annihilation a stake," Neckley muttered, running fingers through her hair in a vain attempt to bring some order to the chaos. She looked like someone who just realized her weekend plans had been canceled by an apocalypse. "I still can't believe it worked." "Believe it," Theo said, sounding like a motivational poster that had been left out in the rain. "We played the hand we were dealt, and we came out on top. For now," Jax added, because someone had to acknowledge the storm clouds in the distance. Literally and metaphorically, Mars wasn't exactly known for its sunny weather, and neither was the universe for its mercy. The command center was a mess. Wires dangled from the ceiling like the entrails of some technological beast, and the screens flickered with the persistence of a kid begging for attention. Kess tapped the datapad, her fingers dancing through commands like a pianist on a caffeine high. "So what's next?" Grunt asked, his voice a gravelly rumble that suggested he'd been gargling with rocks. "We just sit around waiting for the next gang of intergalactic bullies to show up." Kess shrugged, her eyes glued to the scrolling data. "It suggests a vacation, but I hear ChronoScourge territory isn't exactly rated 5-star. Who needs vacations when you've got paradoxes?" Oz said, grinning like a maniac. "I could get used to this." "Let's not make a habit of it," Theo cautioned, his tone somewhere between a concerned leader and a dad who's just realized the kids are having too much fun with the matches. Neckley was busy analyzing the aftermath, her mind a fortress of logic and reason. "We disrupted their timeline. It's a temporary fix, but it'll give us breathing room." "Breathing room's good," Jax interjected, especially when the alternative is suffocation. The team settled into a weary silence, the kind that follows a storm when you're not quite sure if the worst has passed. Outside the Martian landscape was a postcard from hell, red dust swirling in the air, carrying the echoes of their recent victory. Theo stared out at the horizon, a man contemplating the vastness of the universe and his place in it. "You know," he said, voice thoughtful, "I always thought saving the world would feel more climactic." "Maybe we did it wrong," Kess suggested, her smile a tired shadow. "Next time we'll add more pyrotechnics. If there is a next time." Grunt murmured, the realist in him never far from the surface. "I'd like a heads up before we play with the fabric of reality again." "Seconded," Neckley said, raising an imaginary hand. "Paradoxes are a bit too unpredictable for my taste." "But effective," Oz countered, ever the advocate for chaos. "And isn't unpredictability what makes life interesting?" Interesting, Jack said, raising an eyebrow, isn't quite the word I'd use. Chaotic, Grunt offered. Terrifying, Kess added. All of the above, Theo concluded, turning back to his team, a motley crew of misfits and miracle workers united by the odds stacked against them. But we survived, that's something. Survival's overrated, Grunt said, though the glint in his eye suggested he was only half serious. Death's easier? Easier maybe, Kess agreed, but we've got a universe to save, remember. Right, Jack said, nodding as if he needed the reminder. Humanity's last hope and all that. And they said optimism was dead, Kess quipped, her smile a flicker of light in the dim room. The alarms finally fell silent, as if acknowledging the team's victory with a begrudging nod. Peace, however temporary, wrapped around them like an old blanket, full of holes but warm nonetheless. All right, team, Theo said, gathering his courage and his crew. Let's regroup, figure out our next move. The universe isn't going to save itself. And neither are we, Kess added, powering down her datapad with a sense of finality. But we'll give it one hell of a try. They moved as one, a band of weary warriors stepping into the future they'd fought to protect. The path ahead was uncertain, paved with paradoxes and peril, but they had each other. And sometimes, in the vast, indifferent expanse of the cosmos, that was enough. As they left the command center, the Martian dawn painted their world in hues of red, shadows stretching long and bold across the ground. It was a new day, full of potential and promise, and they had no intention of wasting it. Here's to paradoxes and improbabilities, Theo said, raising a metaphorical glass. May they always work in our favor. The laughter that followed was genuine, a rare and precious commodity in a universe where common sense was a myth and survival a testament to stubbornness. They were still standing, and that was no small feat. Together, they faced the dawn, ready to tackle whatever new horrors the universe decided to throw at them. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that human ingenuity and a touch of madness could work wonders, even in the darkest of times. The command center had seen better days, the kind you'd visit on a rainy Tuesday back when life was predictable and the only threat was missing a deadline. Now, the place looked like a toddler had thrown a tantrum with a set of electrical cords. Wires dangled limply, a testament to their recent brush with annihilation. And the screens flickered like they'd been possessed by a particularly jittery poltergeist. Heroic decor, Kess muttered, surveying the mess. All we're missing is a thank you for not dying banner. That would be too optimistic, Neckley quipped, picking her way through the debris with the grace of someone who'd given up on the concept of clean days ago. Maybe a congratulations, you're still breathing card would be more our style. Grunt grunted, which was the closest he ever got to laughter. I'd settle for a drink that doesn't taste like recycled Martian piss. Or a day where we're not trying to outsmart time-traveling aliens, Jax added, still tenderly probing the bruise on his cheek. That's gotta top the list of stupid ways to die. Preferably with a sunset that doesn't look like a painter accidentally knocked over a can of red, Theo said, gesturing towards the Martian landscape that was still very much a dusty red nightmare. Mars sure knows how to keep things depressing. As if on cue, Oz popped up from behind a console, bits of wire still adorning his hair like a particularly avant-garde hat. You know, if we had a marketing team, they'd probably sell this as an immersive apocalypse experience. 10 out of 10 for creativity, Kess said, rolling her eyes. 0 for practicality. So, what's next? Grunt asked, cracking his knuckles like a man preparing to punch his way through bureaucracy. We gonna sit around and bask in our newfound hero status. Hero's a strong word, Theo said, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. More like lucky idiots with a knack for not dying. I prefer survivors of questionable intelligence, personally, Neckley said, pushing her glasses up her nose with an air of exhausted dignity. Well, whatever label we're going with, Jack said, I'd like to know what we're supposed to do now that we've kicked the universe's ass. Maybe get some rest, Kess suggested, although even she sounded skeptical about the idea of relaxation. Rest, Grunt snorted. What's that then, some kind of myth? Yeah, like common sense, Kess replied with a wink, earning a round of weary smiles. The team gathered around a makeshift table cobbled together from various pieces of salvaged equipment. It was as much a testament to their ingenuity as it was to their desperation. There was something almost comforting about its precariousness, like an old friend who couldn't keep a secret but was good for a laugh. So, Theo began, tapping the table like a judge calling for order. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. You mean the one where we just rearrange time like some sort of cosmic interior designers? Oz asked, barely able to contain his manic enthusiasm. Exactly, Theo nodded. We might have averted disaster today, but what about tomorrow? Always tomorrow, Jack said, shaking his head. That's the thing about time. It's got this nasty habit of continuing. We've bought ourselves some breathing room, Neckley pointed out, though her voice was tinged with doubt. But the ChronoScourge are still out there, licking their wounds, and probably plotting their next attempt to make us their personal chew toy, Grunt added, his voice a low rumble. We've rattled their cages, Kess said. Her brow furrowed as she stared at the pulsing artifact sitting on the table like a smug cat that's knocked over a vase. But we've got no idea how far they'll go to get back at us. Whatever it is, Theo said, eyes hardening with resolve. We'll be ready. We have to be. Ready's a strong word, Jack said, leaning back with the sort of lazy confidence that usually got him into trouble. I prefer winging it with style. I'm all for style, Oz said, but I'd like it if it didn't involve temporal anomalies next time. Or aliens with a grudge, Grunt added. Call me old-fashioned, but I prefer my enemies on the same chronological page. Speaking of pages, Neckley said, tapping her datapad thoughtfully, we should document this for posterity. And for the eventual court-martial, Kess joked, though there was a touch of truth in her words. We did save the world, Theo reminded them, though the weight of responsibility was evident in his voice. That's got to count for something. Yeah, about as much as a used lottery ticket, Grunt said, unimpressed as always. The conversation lapsed into a comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of shared burdens and mutual understanding. Outside, the Martian wind howled, carrying with it the dust of 1,000 storms and the ghosts of 1,000,000 dreams. You know, Kess said, breaking the quiet, I always thought saving humanity would come with a parade, or at least a pat on the back. You want a parade? Jax asked, feigning shock. I thought you were allergic to fanfare. I'm not allergic, Kess said with a grin, just mildly intolerant. Well, don't hold your breath for accolades, Grunt said. The universe doesn't hand those out easily. I'll settle for a decent night's sleep, Kess replied, stretching her arms above her head. Dreamer, Oz teased, though there was no malice in his words. As the team prepared to leave the command center, Theo paused, looking each of them in the eye. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Agreed. Like we have a choice, Grunt grumbled, but the warmth in his eyes betrayed his words. Together, Kess echoed, nodding her agreement. They filed out of the command center, leaving behind the chaos and the memories of battles fought and won. The path ahead was still uncertain, a jagged line drawn through time and space. But at least they were the ones holding the pen. The Martian dawn cast long shadows on the ground, painting their world in shades of red and hope. It was a new day, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like they might just be able to shape it into something worth living. Here's to the future, Kess said, raising an imaginary glass to the sky. And to us, Theo added, his voice a quiet promise. The laughter that followed was as genuine as it was rare, a beacon of light in a universe determined to snuff out their spark. They were still standing, still fighting, and for now that was enough. Together they faced the dawn, ready to tackle whatever new horrors the universe decided to throw at them. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that human ingenuity and a touch of madness could work wonders, even in the darkest of times.